Good afternoon. Today's forecast has some good news for Minnesotans. Minnesotans, our workers and our businesses are growing a strong and stable economy. And effective budgeting by decision makers has saved $10 billion in the surplus and our reserve account. That is good news for Minnesota. Our stable economy and balanced budget are a reflection of Minnesotans' tradition of stewardship, good governance, and hard work. But what was a flashing light of caution is now a bright light with warning alarms signaling trouble coming from Republicans and Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Huge cuts to health care and food programs, and shifting costs down to state and local governments and household budgets. Minnesotans are paying more, they're getting less. The increase in revenue in this forecast comes from the wealthiest few who had a great year in the stock market and they cashed out their gains. Good. Meanwhile, a growing number of Minnesotans are behind on credit cards, car notes, and student loans, and the gap between the rich and the rest of us is growing. The Trump Republican budget gives the wealthy another very significant tax cut, and it's paid for by the rest of us. Donald Trump's government and his retribution campaign is harming Minnesotans. He has done these things. He did this. He literally sent masked police who violated civil and constitutional rights. They abducted Minnesotans, and they killed a couple of Minnesotans in our streets. Donald Trump's actions are currently shrinking our workforce, destroying small businesses, and crushing family budgets, the costs of which are not yet evident in the forecast or in people's lives. His agencies are waging financial retribution on Minnesotans, defunding childcare, food programs that keep millions of kids and seniors fed, and health care that keeps hospitals and clinics open and staffed. Minnesotans are paying more in federal taxes than we get back in federal support. It's been that way for a long time, and we don't complain about that in Minnesota. No one needs to give us a medal. We're not Cash Patel. We're not asking for thanks for what we contribute, but we are demanding fairness. The DFL majorities have done everything we can to cut costs for Minnesotans. Billions of dollars in tax cuts for seniors on Social Security and working families. $1 billion for local governments to keep property taxes down. Free school meals for parents and kids, tuition-free college for young people, paid time off for workers. Trump and the Republican Congress are systemically wiping all of that out. Tariffs cost each household $1,700 last year, and Trump seems determined to increase that number in 2026. Housing costs are up through tariffs and labor shortages. Energy costs are on the rise because Republicans canceled clean power projects. There are cuts to and caps on student loans that are pushing college out of reach. Health insurance costs have doubled and tripled because Republicans in Congress didn't extend a tax credit. And hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans will lose health care and food support because of H.R. 1. Property taxes are spiking as new federal mandates burden our counties and leave Minnesotans with fewer services. The Republican affordability plans are an insult to people. They advise taking out a 50-year mortgage to buy a house. They want you to buy health insurance with a $30,000 deductible, or suggest buying fewer dollars for Christmas, or if you're lucky, include the president's sons in your grift scheme so he pardons you. Minnesotans are facing hard decisions because their costs are rising, but their wages are flat, and state leaders are going to face hard decisions this year and into the future, and those will be made infinitely harder because of the chaos and uncertainty created by Donald Trump's vengeful government and his compliant Republican Congress. Last year, we made hard compromises to balance the budget. We did it together. Hard choices resulted in the forecast that we are experiencing today. And I really do hope that we find that spirit again to do the work that Minnesotans sent us here to do. but we face an uncertain future. Most Minnesotans are working very hard, but they're falling behind, and we can't fail them. That's the work of our future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is not a normal forecast day, in part because this forecast comes with the biggest asterisk ever. All of the improvement we saw in the forecast today, in fact, more than all of it, would be offset by just the cuts to Minnesota's Medicaid funding that were announced by the Trump administration earlier in the week if they persist throughout the biennium. And that's to say nothing of the other cuts that Trump has promised, and to say nothing of the impact of Operation Metro Surge, which wasn't felt in the forecast either. Unless Donald Trump's retaliatory campaign against Minnesota is stopped, these surpluses are actually deficits. The chaos and uncertainty Trump has caused will make it very challenging for legislators to make budget decisions going forward, and real Minnesotans will be worse off because of it. I was glad to see the improvement in the state's fiscal position, but it's important to note that that improvement is largely because the richest Minnesotans and the largest corporations are doing better. Regular Minnesotans are still feeling the pain. An ABC News poll that was released just this morning says that over half of Americans believe that health care, a new car, and a week-long vacation are unaffordable. The most striking slide that MMB presented today to me was the one that's showing the huge growth in what they called non-wage income. Non-wage income being a great euphemism for the type of income that rich people make. Capital gains, interest, dividends. You know who doesn't make a lot of non-wage income? Teachers, nurses, construction workers, regular people, not to mention people on Medicaid. All of the folks who are losing their health care because of Donald Trump, they don't make non-wage income. The House DFL will stand with those folks this session. In December, I stood here and talked about the consequences Minnesotans were seeing as a result of the Donald Trump presidency. Higher prices, higher health care costs, more and more giveaways going to billionaires and big corporations at the expense of the rest of us. Since then, Donald Trump has only accelerated his campaign of retribution, which is his word, not mine, against Minnesota. He sent thousands of federal agents here to terrorize our communities. His illegal and chaotic tariff policies continue to hurt families and small businesses, and he continues to be completely disconnected from the reality people are experiencing, as evidenced by the State of the Union earlier this week. And now the Trump administration is looking to cut $259 million per quarter, some $2 billion a biennium in Medicaid funding from Minnesota. They're not interested in solving the problems we're facing. They're only interested in retribution against a state that doesn't support Donald Trump. This is on top of the other funding threats that have come from the federal government. This retribution campaign is simply harming the most vulnerable Minnesotans. J.D. Vance's solution to the problems they're creating: irresponsibly drain our budget reserve and leave our state in worse fiscal shape for the future. But in ordinary and extraordinary ways, Minnesotans have continued to stand up for their neighbors and their communities over the last few months. As legislators, it should be our job to have their back, to respond to the unconstitutional actions of the federal government, to address the fraud targeting programs meant to help some of the most vulnerable Minnesotans, and to help Minnesotans afford their lives. Instead, our Republican colleagues refused to stand up to Trump. I heard the Speaker of the House say that she supported Donald Trump's Medicaid cuts just a moment ago. I thought that was an incredible moment, that she supported his Medicaid cuts. They cheer him on as he attacked our state, and they continue to defend a broken status quo and a rigged system designed to work only for the rich and the powerful. The people of Minnesota deserve better than that. DFOs will continue to stand up for Minnesotans and will continue to work to build a future where hard work is actually rewarded, families have a real chance to get ahead, and communities can thrive. We're happy to take your questions.
I'm hearing from both of you that you feel like it's hard with the volatility of will the money be cut, will it not be cut? They didn't even talk about some of the other pools of money that they've cut and then blocked by courts, ping pong match going on. How do you assess this when you go to, do your work about any supplemental budget? Do you just have to say there's no room because we could be staring down these significant cuts?
I think that we're in the middle of a budget, first and foremost. And at least as we are thinking about it, we're keeping an eye on the things that need to happen, the urgent things that need to happen. If we do a bonding bill, which we plan to do, we'll have to pay for the debt service. We should pay for the security measures that have been put in place in the capital and the personnel costs. So there are some things that we need to spend on. But our caucus is very, very committed to being frugal, if you will, prudent, as we must, so that we are in a strong position going forward, and perhaps we can weather whatever comes from the Trump administration. And you're right that we can't predict it. He is unpredictable, and it is uncertain, and there could be billions of dollars worth of cuts. And Mark Johnson said cheers to the federal government. I would say cheers to that behavior of holding those things over the state's head and putting vulnerable Minnesotans at risk. So as we balance this budget, we're going to have to think about what kind of flexibility is going to be necessary for the administration if those cuts come in the summer, so we don't get called back in. But hopefully, the Republican members of the Congress that serve and represent the people of Minnesota will talk some sense into Donald Trump and make sure that the taxes that we pay into the federal government come back for us to be able to use for the people of Minnesota.
The Republicans' significant priorities is tax conformity with the federal tax cuts that were passed. Is that something that the DFL is open to?
Yeah, so the bill that passed the federal government this summer is massive, and it has huge impacts on all sectors of the economy and all sorts of people. And as we look at tax conformity, and we will take a very strong look at it, we're going to be assessing who are the winners and the losers in that federal bill. And then we're going to think about what should we do with our limited resources. Should we make those winners even better off, or should we help the losers in that bill? Because we do have limited resources, made even more limited by the actions of the federal government. So at some point, I think that we do need to have a really serious conversation about conformity, but we can't just cheer on the federal government. We have to be really thoughtful about how we approach conformity.
Follow up to that, no tax on overtime and tips that was mentioned, those generally would help more working class voters, and you're saying that that's who you want to support here. So is that something you're open to? Is there a way to even do it partially if it's too costly to the state's budget?
Well, I think it very much depends on how it's paid for. I mean, we do want to help the people who are struggling with affordability in Minnesota. You heard the numbers that the speaker articulated. I didn't really hear a thought about how that would be paid for. I'd like to know more about how we pay for it. We certainly, the DFL could come up with a plan to pay for that, and we'd be happy to do that. Like I said, the wealthiest people and the richest corporations did very well in that federal tax bill. They did very well. And I don't think that they need to continue doing very well by the decisions we make in Minnesota's government.
Specific revenue-raising tax increase proposals that you're mulling right now, maybe?
With regard to the budget and taxes and tax conformity, I spent a lot of time this week with my colleague, Senator Rest, and her very sharp pencils and her very sharp mind. And she does have some things that she is considering. The Senate DFL did introduce last year a social media tax, which is a tax on data for those who are making a lot of money in the marketplace. So we'll see what she comes up with. But to the earlier question about conformity, I think just conforming with the federal government would be about $1 billion cost to the state's budget. And we have to think about what we're doing to propel Minnesotans forward.
Any other ballpark? I know North Star Policy Action said 100 million lost wages due to Metro surge. Any other ballpark sense of just the last 2 months, workers staying home, businesses temporarily or permanently closing? Any sense of what the impact really might be?
I don't know. I don't have a big dollar amount to share with you, and I don't know if Leader Murphy does. But I was just going to mention the city of Minneapolis came and visited with us yesterday and talked about the increased costs that they are bearing, which I think, was it 80? Yeah.
So the only estimate that has been provided to me, at least, is the estimate from the city of Minneapolis on the impact and their economics in the city, and it's over $200 million. And that's just one city. So certainly the economic impact for the state is going to be tremendous, and as was mentioned, that isn't in the forecast right now.
Outlook make it difficult to do any sort of relief package for small businesses or renters or others who are affected by the surge?
Again, I think that we have to look at the urgent things we can do for the people of Minnesota while keeping our eye on the budgetary balance going forward. And I think most of us are thinking about either spending and reductions to balance out together because we want to make sure the future budget and that bottom line stays intact.
What sort of
urgent things can you do?
For instance, Senator Port has been working over the course of the last couple of weeks on some assistance for people who have not been able to pay their rent, a very short-term, very targeted effort. That bill will be heard, I believe, next week in taxes. It's already been heard in the Minnesota House. That's a really good example. Senator Champion also working on a small business-oriented package. And when I was in Wilmer, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, I was reminded by small business owners there that their businesses have struggled just like the ones in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the surrounding suburbs because of ICE and detentions and people not coming to work because they're fearful. This is a statewide issue, even though some of my colleagues don't recognize it. And when we have had statewide crises in the past, we've come together to solve them for the people that have been impacted. And I think we need to take care of people in that same form this year.
What size bonding bill do you think you can afford now?
You know, House Democrats want as big of a bonding bill as we can get. There are tremendous infrastructure needs across the state of Minnesota. And when we talk about property taxes, this is one way that we can render assistance by helping cities and counties with infrastructure costs that they would otherwise bear themselves. It also creates jobs for working Minnesotans. So we are absolutely all in for a large bonding bill. And as Senator Murphy said, we are committed to paying for it and finding commensurate reductions or revenue sources that will pay for it. We're going to have a long discussion about the budget, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but we want that. What we don't want is to be held hostage on the bonding bill, and we won't. If there's a price tag that isn't measured in dollars but in unrelated policy changes, we won't pay it.
IT upgrades too that the governor mentioned?
Yeah, more than on board. And I was frankly pretty offended by the idea that they had to fight tooth and nail. It's ridiculous. Representative Jess Hansen led on trying to fund SSIS for years. And Chair Torkelson deserves great credit for the work he did last year on it. It was, as the governor said, a bipartisan effort, and it was just a complete distortion of the truth to say that they had to fight for it. We rolled out an anti-fraud package last week, or earlier this week, excuse me, it feels like last week. And it included making investments in IT, because we do think that that's an important way that we can prevent fraud before it actually occurs, which should be the goal. It's great to have accountability, and we need accountability. The people who are responsible and the businesses that are responsible need to be held accountable for that fraud. But the goal should be to prevent fraud before it happens. And getting these systems into this century, getting them out of the Oregon Trail era and into the modern day is a great way to do that.
As you mentioned this week too, that the cost associated with the upgrades will be expensive, but an investment worth making. Do you think that the numbers you see today allow for such an investment that could be hundreds of millions of dollars potentially?
Yeah, I think potentially. I think that, again, I agree with what Senator Murphy said, that as we're making spending decisions, we have to be looking at the long term and thinking about how we pay for things very carefully. And so we're going to have to find a way to pay for that. That's not just taking money off the bottom line. Do I think there's a way to do that? I do. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.